This is Chase Bailey from Left Bank Films. And Left Bank Films is proud to present our very first podcast called The Love of Film. This is our first episode, and our first episode will cover our favorite films from the 1940s. Our podcasters tonight include Todd Hunter, Kate Jurdi, Brigid Abreu, Dennis Collins Johnson, Freeman Fletcher, and myself. For tonight's podcast, we will present our top 3 films from the 1940s, starting in reverse order with number 3.
Okay, so starting off, you said film noir. So starting off, number 3 on my top drama is Laura from 1944, directed by Otto Preminger, starring Dana Andrews, Gene Tierney, and Clifton Webb, with a screenplay by Jay Dratler, Samuel Hoffenstein, Elizabeth Reinhardt, and a uncredited King Lardner Jr. And I just adore this movie. It's one that I watched in college and I wasn't really paying attention to. And then during the pandemic, I went back to it, as I think a lot of us did, just go back to stuff we'd seen before to revisit. And it's really a brilliant screenplay with a incredible mid narrative twist that flips everything on its head. And Gene Tierney had a very messy life, but it's very obvious why she took off after seeing Laura, which I think was pretty early in her career, if not at the beginning. Because she is magnetic in it from the minute she's introduced. You're like, oh yes, I understand. And
painting food.
This whole obsession with this character. So Laura, my number 3 pick.
We're going to have overlap, obviously. and Laura is my number 3 pick also. What you're talking about with Preminger, the film was so dynamic. Gene Tierney was gorgeous, and the direction was superb. The cinematography was superb. I just loved that film. I absolutely adored that film.
Who was the cinematographer?
Oh gosh, do you have it in front of you? I don't.
I can get it real quick. I also want to say Gene Tierney's great in it, and then also Dana Andrews and Clifton Webb. Clifton Webb, who had been blacklisted in Hollywood for a short period before that because he was out. He was gay and he was out, which was a big no-no, obviously. And he got nominated for an Oscar for his performance in it as Waldo Lydecker, who's this incredible, one of the great film characters. But also Dana Andrews, who plays this kind of sort of, I don't want to say schlubby, but just like kind of everyman detective, but he's really interesting and he's very mellow in an interesting, off-putting way. It was shot by Joseph Lachelle and an uncredited Lucien Ballard.
Okay.
Which I don't know how uncredited cinematography works, but
yeah.
Well, cinematography wasn't.
You guy on the camera. What's your name?
Cinematography wasn't much respect.
Guess so.
It was like in the lower tier of the credits.
Yeah.
Lucien Ballard worked with Kubrick on The Killing. They got they bounced heads off of each other off of a shot that Lucien tried to. Kubrick wanted it one way. It was like a tracking shot, and Lucien had been around quite a bit, and he figured, well, I can make this a lot easier on myself if I shoot it this way. And Kubrick said, but what about the perspective of the scene? And Lucien was like, well, that won't change much, which wasn't true. Lucien was just looking to make it easier on himself, and Kubrick was like, I think he was a kid, absolute kid. And he said to Lucien, he said, "Put the camera back where I told you to put it, or get off my set." And there was a tense moment, and Lucien did what Kubrick wanted to do. So
And Lucien Ballard's in a very good company there of people who did not like Kubrick.
Todd, you're next with your number 3.
My number 3. Well, my number 3. I have to say, just going into this, I made a couple of rules for myself that I was only going to focus on the films that I owned. That way, I could learn more from everyone else around me, because one of the things that I like to do getting together with film aficionados is learning about new films that I haven't seen that people that I respect enjoy. So already, I've never seen Laura, so now I have that on my list. But the first, my number 3 out of my collection that I put was Hitchcock's Rebecca, which to me is kind of funny, because it's like, well, if you're going to put that at number 3, what the hell is number 2 and number 1? But I remember when I saw, the only film courses I ever took, I was lucky enough when I was at UNH. Peter Mashu, he was a NYU film course professor. And his first semester there, I was lucky enough to take, because he gave us all an intro to film at an NYU level course. The semester after, UNH said to him, basically, you need to dumb down this course. People, the kids aren't going to pay attention. Of course, I got like A's. It was the first time I actually got A's in college because of this course. So I was, devastated once I found this out after I graduated. But Rebecca was, of course, one of the films that I saw in the film course. And I remember when I saw it at the time, I was just fascinated by Hitchcock's approach. I mean, the most I had known about Hitchcock up to that point had been Psycho. Just because everybody knew about Psycho at that point, is coming out of high school going into college, everyone's at least heard of it. And when they said we were going to watch a Hitchcock film, I didn't expect this. It's based off a Daphne du Maurier novel. I didn't expect this just gothic, castle and the fog and Olivier being crazy, and then the mother, and then the housekeeper, and I was like, what is this movie? This is not what I expected from Hitchcock, and even now when I watch it, and to be honest, I have not seen it in a while, but there are images in it that I just sear in my brain. Even, the interiors of the castle, and, that when she first came out in her gown for the party that night, and Olivier is just looking at her, but just the framing of it, just the gargantuan size of the house, like right behind her. It's very much almost, I wouldn't be surprised if it had influenced Kubrick's, again, Kubrick. Can you tell he's my favorite? The Shining decades later, because that castle was very much a character in the film. And I've never read the novel, and I don't know how much that element was in the novel or how much as a visual medium Hitchcock translated that for Rebecca. But my point is that I was just absolutely stunned by the visuals of it. I hate to say it, because you don't criticize Olivier, but like the acting in it, I wasn't particularly paying attention to. Olivier was Olivier, and the actors were very much making sure the plot was moving forward as far as I was concerned watching it. For me, it was the visuals and the atmosphere and just the storytelling of it. So it became immediately one of my favorite Hitchcocks. And when I looked over at the 1940s films, I knew it just had to be at least in my top 3.
What you said that this wasn't a typical Hitchcock. And I don't understand that, because the suspense in there and the thrilling part of that, especially with, the death of Olivier's wife.
Hmm.
Um, uh, I think it was a typical Hitchcock to me.
You think it was typical because at that time he was doing films like what, Saboteur, even what, Shadow of a Doubt later on with Joseph Cotten.
Spellbound.
Well, Shadow of a Doubt was earlier, wasn't it?
It was 43, I think. I saw that actually in the theater. Hold on, I have the date written down.
I thought Shadow of a Doubt was in the 30s.
1943.
43. Okay, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Well,
But
yeah,
Spellbound was, kind of the same.
Well, I think I kind of agree with Todd, because the thing that Rebecca, as he said, it has a lot more gothic atmosphere than a lot of Hitchcock stuff. And also what Rebecca has that, or doesn't have, I love Rebecca. Rebecca was in my top 5. It's an honorable mention. What Rebecca doesn't have that other Hitchcock stuff does have is that Hitchcock movies are kind of defined and remembered by their set pieces, their sort of suspense set pieces, these sequences with these building, the tower in Vertigo, the shower scene in Psycho. And Rebecca doesn't really have that. Rebecca's this like prolonged chess match between these two women. And I think where I disagree with Todd is that I think the performances are phenomenal. I think Joan Fontaine in that movie is just fantastic.
George
Judith
Saunders.
Anderson's great.
And George Saunders as
Yes.
cousin Jack.
Yeah, they're all. I mean, it is an exquisite film to sound as pretentious as possible. But yes, I do agree. It's a great movie.
I'm with you. I'm with you on it's definitely in my honorable mentions. And there's one shot in particular. I watched that film rather a lot. I don't know what it is about it. It's like I come back to it a lot, and I'll watch scenes from it. And one of my favorite things is, and I won't spoil it for anyone that hasn't seen it, but there's this conversation. Are we okay to do that? I don't know.
Yes, spoiler alert.
So there's a scene in there's a scene where Laurence Olivier is his character is telling the second Mrs. De Winter about a conversation he had with Rebecca, and he says, and she sat over there, and it's just this frame of like this empty couch, and she stood up, and the frame just moves up, and she's not there. You never see what she looks like, and she just has this, like, it's the most that I've felt a ghostly presence from a film, even with all the modern horror, like supernatural stuff that they've made. This film has like the feeling of a ghost story, like a true ghost story. So good for October, so good for this time. Yes.
And it also has one of the most amazing miniatures in film, which is the entire exterior of the house is this massive miniature, and you would not know it to look at it. And the way that they bring the little what were toy cars coming through around it and stuff, and you would never notice.
Well, it's really great for creating a building sense of tension that has to break at some point, and it really is part of the anticipation process during that. Hitchcock's really good at that anyway, but I think in this particular film that worked really well. Build the tension. Somebody said once that suspense is more important than surprise, because suspense builds, and you can keep people involved. Surprise is wow, and it's over. So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
So my third drama is The Best Years of Our Lives, from 45, I believe. Let me see. I'll get it up here. I'll get all the. Oh no, it's 46.
46, yeah.
And we've got Myrna Loy and Frederick Marsh, and it's of course directed by William Wyler, written by Robert E. Sherwood and McKinley Cantor. All right, and anyway, it's my third top drama because I was sort of rewatching a lot of the films from the 40s, thinking about what still resonated with my heart today. And, you know, because there's a lot of allowances I have to make for like, right, that was different culturally, or like, right, that was a thing. And this film really feels, I don't know, I cried, you know, and that's always a good sign to me. It's got this heart of like three different homecoming stories for these three different veterans, and they've all got such different, they're received so lovingly, which is great to see. But they've each got, you know, one of them struggles with alcoholism, one of them struggles with the fact he lost his hands and doesn't know if he's still going to be loved and accepted and seen as competent, and another one is dealing with like a wife that like he just married like a month before he left, and he comes back home and it's like, do I even know you? Like, now I get to be acquainted to my wife, and like, actually, am I in love with someone else? And it's so weird. It's like, I don't know. I think it's something that I would absolutely watch today. And that's kind of how I ranked my films, was like, this isn't just a film that if I was in the 1940s that I would love. I love it now. And I think it's got a lot of resonance for vets. And of course, we have a lot of those kinds of films in this decade. But it's, yeah, it's just gorgeous. And it's very long, but it's gorgeous.
Was it one of the first films that dealt with veterans coming home?
That's a good question.
Because I've been aware.
I think
I've never
so.
seen
I
it.
think so, Todd.
Yeah.
I think it was for sure. That was the very first film that I actually watched that was about veterans coming home.
Wow.
Yeah,
So it's
and
very
it's
historical.
dealt with beautifully. It's so nuanced, and you know, it's just, it's an absolute tearjerker. And Myrna Loy is great in it, and she doesn't get enough props. You know, she never won an Oscar, and she got like an honorary one at the end of her life, and she's just wonderful in it. She's so good.
Here's
I
your
have to
honorary
admit-
Oscar, and there's the kitchen door. We'll see you later.
Yeah.
I
Well,
haven't seen Best Years of Our Lives, but when you said Myrna Loy, I was like, well, I'll watch it now.
Yeah.
Also, isn't the veteran who lost his hands, wasn't he played by an actor who, like, he wasn't an actor, he actually
Yeah.
had
Yeah.
lost?
He's an amputee. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
from the war. Yeah, I mean, it was.
that wasn't really done back then, so
Yeah.
that's a big.
There's this heartbreaking scene where he's showing the girl, he's like been trying to push her away, this girl that, you know, was his sweetheart before the war, and he's like, come up here, I want you to see what has to happen. And he shows her like him getting ready for bed, and he's taking off his harness and he's taking off his hooks, and he's like, now I'm as helpless as a baby. I can't, if that door shuts, I can't get out of here. If I fall down, there's no one here to help me up. Like, you know, and he really is like, this is what you're getting into. And it's just, and she's just so, you know, accepting. It's so beautiful. It's, yeah.
I think you brought up an interesting point, Freeman, that back then, you know, using someone true to form, it wasn't really done. But interestingly, I think, just as a side note, the 40s were so progressive. They kind of parallel to the 70s, and I mean, clearly cinema verite started before them, but it became very popular then. And I think there was a lot of that, using real people. I mean, Antonioni comes to mind with Zabriskie Point, just using real people. So I don't know, just as a side note, and I don't know if it was, I'd have to study the cinema a little bit more from that decade and doing that. But that's an interesting point.
Kate, have you seen the film?
No, I haven't. And actually, when I give my reviews, I'm going to do a preface like Todd did. It's a little bit similar, but I have not. But it's on my list to see it.
Okay.
I feel like we all now have running lists. I'm like, okay,
I
Laura.
know. Well,
I'm typing them right now.
At first, I was going to watch every one. And then when Chase was like, y'all, there's so many, like, just pick it. So, and also make a list so we don't do the overlap. And I never saw, I went back on the Google and spreadsheet, and I didn't see any lists made. And I'm like, I think we're all going to probably take from different pools, which is great. Because otherwise I was going to watch, like, I was going to binge watch quite a few of them, even though I watched quite a few anyway. I was going to do all of them.
Fantastic. Okay, Kate, you're up next. Number
Yeah,
3.
hi guys. Yep. So, well, I already kind of explained that I put them all together, but like Todd, but not really for the same reason. And I'm not a cheap person, but I already have a few streaming services going, and I just found like, oh, there were a lot, especially the Hitchcock that you had to pay for that weren't either. I couldn't. My mom is a big this era of Hollywood, especially 40s and 50s, probably some 30s as well. So I got some from her, and then whatever I didn't have on my streaming service, and also I didn't watch. So there's quite a few that you all have already mentioned that I have not seen. And then there are a few that quite a few that I had seen from film studies classes. I actually did a Nazi cinema film class, which if anyone's interested in talking about that. And so and my professor actually, interestingly, was the premier Germanic professor of at Harvard. So Professor Rensler, and he wrote quite a few books. So some of these, like Mrs. Miniver, I could never revisit again. I mean, I actually wrote a paper on that and paralleled it to a propaganda film from Nazi cinema, actually.
Oh yeah, they considered it. The American folks considered it propaganda. Like even
it actually.
yeah.
So yeah, it's funny that you said that, Brigid, because a lot of people look at me like I have 10 heads. And sorry, I don't want
no, they distributed it specifically as propaganda for the war effort. And that actress, she sold war bonds because she was like, was it Greer Garson? Is that who it is?
So
yeah, I think.
Yeah.
You know what's interesting about Mrs. Miniver is that it was considered, it was considered part, like between 1941, I believe, and 1945, it was called anti-Nazi cinematic creations. And in between England and the United States, probably rightfully so out of guilt, because they should have been there a lot fucking sooner, created these cinematic expressions of, oh, we're the heroes, aren't we so wonderful? We did all this great stuff. No, you didn't. You waited too long. And so I couldn't, sorry, I couldn't visit Mrs. Miniver, but I'd be happy to, chat with anyone who's interested. I wrote a paper on it. But yeah, it's interesting that you knew that, Brigid. You probably learned that in film studies too.
I actually learned it from, and shout out to a great YouTube person named, or well, she's not named, but her channel is Be Kind Rewind. And she does awesome video essays on all these. She does like deep dives on specific years. And she did one on Greer Garson Galvanizes a Nation, which is how I know about that. Because they really used her persona to try to get people to buy war bonds, and like people saw her as the character and really related to that. And before 1942, before we had been involved really in the war, all the execs had been like, we can't do anything about what's happening because America's staying neutral. So, and then as soon as they got the go ahead, like that was the first film, and they were like, all right, we're going to put out all of our like nationalistic, propaganda. They actually called it propaganda. They had
their anti-Nazi cinematic creations that were considered propaganda from the other side, so to speak. And I think Warner Brothers, as a side note, was the only one that stopped distributing films to Germany because it was too profitable for a lot of the other production companies. They, like you said, they wanted to remain, quote, neutral. So WB stepped in and stopped in the 30s, actually. I think it was like maybe 1938.
Wow. And this is a funny tidbit. And sorry, I'll shut up about this in a second because I want to get to your number 3. But apparently after the war, they would show films in Germany that were kind of like about the Holocaust and about the war and what had happened. And German citizens who were, very much hurting at that time financially would have to sit and watch these films, and then they could get like the equivalent of like food stamps. And so if they sat and watched these films by like, people like William Wyler, and Billy Wilder was one, then they would be able to actually get the food stamps. So it was like this way of being like, no, look at what happened, look at what you did, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And, Charlie Chaplin, of course, that's on my top with The Great Dictator. I mean, that was released in the 1940, before the invasion. It was very controversial. So Anyway, so interesting. Anyone that wants to talk about that more, I have tons of notes from that class. And it was a hard one to get through. I had friends help me actually get through it. It was really hard, but my professor was amazing. And I think it's also very important to know, because what we learned in history, it was very one-sided. So you get the whole truth, whether it's controversial or not. About what really happened. So, yeah, at any rate, so there were quite a few that I haven't seen, but the ones, I'm a film noir junkie like Chase, like huge, from 1940s and then also the 70s and 80s. I just watched a big retro on that. So my number 3 actually is A Double Life.
Oh.
Believe it or not.
Oh,
yeah. I'm a huge Ronald Colman fan, and also I just and I'll give you, like everyone else today, I like how you guys are doing that. So I'll give you the director is George Cukor. Signe Hasso, I don't know if I'm pronouncing her name right, Signe Hasso, Ronald Colman, and kind of an odd choice, right? But I love him, and I also really love the representation of our industry, and anyone that's in, you guys are all in the industry. So I just thought it was kind of a not so hyperbolic reflection, the lack of limits, boundaries, and at times sanity that acting requires. I wrote down some of the quotes because I thought they were really, apropos. I think at the end, Ronald Colman says, Bill, keep an eye out for the papers right before he dies. Don't let them say I was a bad actor, And I'm also a sucker for the film within a film. I don't know how you guys feel, but there were stories within a story. So I love that they were doing Othello, and there was also the whole film going on. So actor within an actor, film within a film. There was a part, I'm going to relate it to The Treasure of Sierra Madre. Again, love the meanings of both these movies. There was certain areas, and I'm all for like a slow moving film, a long film, that I actually felt you could rewind or cut out of the film. It kind of dragged in certain parts. And specifically, there was a scene from Othello, and I don't know if that's because of the purity that Shakespearean, plays and also adaptations kind of, they require them, or you get, like Hamlet, they kind of gave it a hard time because they cut out 2.5 hours, but it's a little bit overly precious in my point of view. But yeah, I loved stylistically how the film was set up. To me, there were and someone else brought this up. I don't know in what film there was a gothic feel maybe to. Were you talking about Rebecca?
Rebecca.
Yeah. So I wonder, Chase. I don't know if you can add in here, but I wonder if there's a connection between some noir and German expressionism, because I found that going on here, that it was definitely noir in the sense that these kind of moral boundaries, especially between the detectives and the actors, they were kind of blurred. And I think that's why I love noir so much, that it's not non-judgmental, and it opens up this kind of fantasy world.
Well, why are you saying German expressionism?
Well, there were certain times in A Double Life that I felt that claustrophobic feeling that German expressionism theater gives the viewer, like certain Fritz Lang's films in The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm wondering if there were remnants of that in the early noir years.
Are you especially talking about the scenes when Ronald Colman is with his mistress before he kills her? Or?
Yeah, there was that, like her apartment seemed almost like a set, Chase. Like,
yeah, it's like a little narrow stairwell and this little brownstone kind of walk up kind of thing.
Yeah. So I definitely found reflections of that in this film, but I'm trying to think. I mean, just the detective.
Well, everything was claustrophobic in that film, if I remember correctly.
Do you think so?
Even the the Othello sets were claustrophobic, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, the curtain and certain. I mean, it was just such a blur between, and again, I don't know if that was a characteristic.
Who was the director? Was it Kukor?
Yes.
Okay, so
1947.
the director purposely, I think, was, the double life. I mean, he was living Othello and living as the actor. What was Ronald Colman's name?
Oh my gosh, I wrote it down. I don't think I remember it.
I don't remember, but he
Was it
did a
Tony?
wonderful job.
Was it
Did
Tony?
he get the Academy Award?
No, Tony was the other guy. And Britta, I don't think so. I think he was nominated. He did not get it. I can't remember who he lost to. That's something that we've done because we've done podcasts on.
But that's
I don't usually pay attention to that because I think
that's a good film.
I loved it, and I think Ronald Colman is such a force, and I don't know, for that time period, I liked that. Todd.
I'd have to go back and re-look at it. I haven't seen it for a long time.
I think you should, and you can get it. I think I messaged you guys. It's free on YouTube. But Todd, you kind of hit on an interesting point where the acting is a little bit different back, or you don't insult Olivier. But Olivier was notoriously big for the screen. That Dennis. Dustin Hoffman talked about how he had to kind of pull Olivier aside on Marathon Man. It was like, you need to take it down a little bit. You're a little, and he says, "Are you saying I'm too big? Is it too big? So I totally. But the thing about Ronald Colman, he's so kind of how I feel about Boris Karloff. There again, these films I think were ahead of their time, and I think Ronald Colman was so much of a naturalistic actor. He embodied it, and it was nothing showy. He just kind of embodied the character. So, yeah. There was another interesting line. And I think Tony was talking to Tony. Tony was the guy that was in love with Britta. I'm forgetting Coleman's name in this. I apologize, guys. But I thought it was interesting. He said he was talking about how he thinks he doesn't even realize that he's doing this. He thinks they're bad dreams. And Tony says, whatever the terrors of waking hours, at least you can fight them. I thought that was interesting because he was explaining that, basically in your dreams you can't, but at least you can in your waking hours. But here's Ronald Colman not knowing the difference between the two and unable to fight them.
I apologize. I don't remember that movie that well. I just know that I loved it. It's one of my honorable.
Do you want
mentions.
spoiler alerts? Well, he basically can't remember.
I know he kills the mistress. I mean, there's no spoiler alerts in this.
Yeah.
We're talking about films from the 40s.
I think you guys
haven't seen it. I want to be surprised.
I haven't either.
I think you guys would like it. And if
I don't think I've heard of it.
Do you know Ronald Colman? Are you familiar with his work?
No, I'm a big fan
phenomenal.
of George Cukor's romantic comedies, but I don't really know any of his. I thought he only did romantic comedies.
I'm going to write that down. I'm not familiar with his romantic comedies. No, Ronald Colman is.
Didn't he do the
Philadelphia Story? Yes.
We got one coming up.
Story, yeah. One of my favorite romantic comedies. Okay, so I'm going to have to cut you off, Kate. We're going to have to go to Dennis.
I'm done.
I've been waiting for Dennis forever.
You don't cut me off. I'm done. I love that.
Well,
God damn it.
It's interesting, the broad swath of films that we all are attached to. Now, I can't judge solely on best because affection has a lot to do with it. And of course, that influences just about everything. But I just wanted to say, first off, that it's really hard for me, and maybe for anybody, to not think that Citizen Kane is the best film of all time, and certainly of the 40s. But I'm going to leave it off my list. And I know somewhere the ghost of Orson Welles is going, what? There's a person in New Hampshire who has a list of favorite 40s films, and my film is not even on it. But, because it's a
when
great
we get
film.
to the 80s, Transformers, the movie will definitely be on our list.
Well, so my number 3 is Key Largo.
Ooh.
And the reason I like Key Largo so much as a film, and it's a play that they shot, but performance. It's got a great cast. Let's see the cast, because old guys' memories are not really good. Let's see. Oops.
Bogart, Robinson, Bacall.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. And
How could you not
Edward G.
remember
Robinson.
Hard to
them?
beat.
Bogart, Bacall, and
Lionel Barrymore, who's not playing a villain in A Wonderful Life, like he did, is very sympathetic and acting out of a wheelchair. I mean, you got to give it to a guy who can actually get cast and can't. I thought it was arthritis, but I'm told that he fell and he broke his shoulder and he broke his hip and a knee or something like that, and it added to the fact that it was arthritis. And you can see with his hands all the time when they're showing his hands that his arthritis was pretty serious. But anyway, he acts from the wheelchair and he does a great job, very, very empathetic, sympathetic. John Huston directed, and he and Bogart did some really cool stuff together. He comes up again for me at some point. It's the last Bogart and Bacall film, which they're all really good. I've seen them. I have another.
was that their last?
Yeah, the last one together.
Huh.
To Have and Have Not is somewhere on my list. But that was their first film where they fell in love. Films where the stars fall in love. We should just do that as a topic. But Key Largo, it's got great performances. I don't know why. I feel like Bogart he really underplayed that, and he could play bad guys. He started out playing bad guys in Dead End and Petrified Forest in the 30s, and of course he's a leading man by this point, and he does it understated so well. The war hero who comes to tell the family of his friend who was killed about the friend because he feels he owes it to them, and so he ends up falling in love with the wife, the widow. And Lionel Barrymore is the father, and then Edward G. and his mob show up, and apparently in the original play they were Mexican gangsters. But what's really cool is that Edward G. Robinson portrays a gangster who knows his time is over. The gangster time is finished. It ain't the 30s anymore. It's the late 40s, and he does a great job of playing that character just beautifully. Everything in it is top notch as far as performance goes. They build suspense. It's beautifully shot in black and white. The cinematographer was Carl Freund, and I remember looking him up to see what else he did. But let me just mention that I found that a lot of times in the 40s, the cinematographers, I don't know how the hell they did it. Some of them are making 12 films a year. And great cinematographers. This guy, let's see.
A lot of drinking and cigarettes. That's how they did it.
Yeah, a lot of not living too long.
But they burned bright.
He had done a heck of a lot of films before this one, and but he died or he stopped making films about 1950, so a little time after this. But yeah, I've seen that film. I've seen Key Largo many times.
What a great film!
I want to go to Key Largo just to say, hey, I've been there.
Yeah.
I can't believe I still haven't seen it. I've always wanted to see that film. Thank you so much, Dennis, for bringing
Okay,
that
so
to
I'm gonna cut you off, Dennis, because we're running short of time.
I researched it. Okay.
Okay. So we're gonna go to Mr. Fletcher and go with his number 2. And we're gonna have to pick up the pace a little bit.
Or we'll never get there.
Spoiler alert, my 2 and my 1 are from the same directors, and actually the same cinematographers, and a lot of the same cast. But my number 2 is The Red Shoes from 1948, directed by Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger, starring Moira Shearer, Anton Walbrook, and Marius Goring, and it was shot by Jack Cardiff. It's might be the most beautiful movie ever made. It's shot in it's like the prime example of Technicolor. It's a classic melodrama. You've seen it a million times before, but you've never seen it like this. There's an incredible, it's all about ballet and dance, and there's an incredible 15-minute sequence in the middle that's the full ballet that's just breathtaking witness. So yeah, The Red Shoes. I just gave a sort of my thoughts. It's a beautiful movie.
I've never seen it. I've never
It
seen it.
it's one of those, I saw it in college, not in a class, but Criterion used to do these wonderful little short videos where it's like the three things, their three favorite things about whatever movie they were releasing. And they released one for this movie that really is a great trailer. So I'd recommend looking that up. It got me to watch it, and I'm very grateful it did. So
I saw it it was playing at the Brattle Freeman. I don't know if you ever get down there, and I can't remember if I saw the full length of it, or I think I did. But sometimes when you
it
see
is
so
pretty
many
long.
films, it's very long. But it was beautiful. Yeah, the whole Technicolor. I remember that.
Yeah.
And if you haven't seen Murder by Contract, that's another one Scorsese loves. You'll see where he gets his sense of humor that he adds into his films by watching. It's a B film from the 50s. It's fantastic.
Okay,
Darren Aronofsky's Black Swan was somewhat based off of Red Shoes, wasn't it?
really? Black Swan?
Probably. I think any movie about ballet is in some way indicative of.
Did you see Black Swan?
The Red.
I
I haven't, because I saw Perfect Blue.
Oh.
Now, is the Red Shoes? I don't think I've seen that either. Is that similar to the Hans Christian Andersen story, The Red Shoes?
Yeah, so the ballet that they do in the movie is based off that. It does not end with the woman chopping her legs off with an axe, but it's essentially the same story. So,
it was for kids. I mean, what could they do?
Okay, so my number 2 is, we don't have to spend much time on this, is Rebecca. I loved Rebecca. I think Olivier and Fontaine did a wonderful job, especially Fontaine. I love the story. I love the feel. I love the ending. I love the start and the way they kind of sandwiched the start and the end together. And of course, I love Hitchcock. What can I say? I loved his directing. Everything about that was good. And I know that you talk about these big open spaces, this big Mandalay mansion, et cetera, but they also brought it in a lot of instances. But, they start out in the French Riviera, and they go to Mandalay and everything's big and gracious and all that kind of crap. But it becomes claustrophobic at the end. They bring it in to some really tiny spaces, and then they bring it to the big ending with the fire at the mansion. So it's like, I like the way it was done. It was like open and free and everything's carefree, and then they start adding in the suspense. What's really going on here? What happened to Rebecca? Is she really missing? Was that the real body or whatever? So it was my number 2. And I'm going to make a little caveat here. As Dennis said earlier, I'm going to reiterate, I have left Casablanca and Citizen Kane off of this list.
I was expecting somebody else to do those. I was like,
I did the exact opposite. They're both on my list. You can figure some.
Fantastic. Okay.
I left those 2 off my list. I mean,
because I felt like you had to. You know what I mean?
The guys that have known me for years, I've posted on Facebook my top 50 films, my top 50 books that I've ever read. And my number 1 film of all time is Casablanca. My number 2 film is Citizen Kane. So
if they don't make the list, you're tough.
They don't make the list in this one because there's other things to see. And that's what I'm talking about. I mean,
is Godfather up there for you, Chase?
It's number 3. Godfather number 4.
None of those would be. My number 1 is Antonioni, actually. So but I think you would echo a lot of people's personal choices.
Yeah, but when we get to the Godfather decade, I'm not going to mention Godfather either. Because there's so many fucking great films out there. It's just, and when I rewatched Rebecca and Laura and some of these other films, I went, how did I miss them? They're just really, really great films.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I also just really quickly, and you can cut this, but I just wanted to shout out again Joan Fontaine. The next year she was in a okay Hitchcock movie called Suspicion, which she won an Oscar for, and she pretty much only won that Oscar because of how good she is in Rebecca. So
I agree with you,
and they owed it to her.
Yeah.
So
Suspicion wasn't that good of a film. Yeah.
no.
Did she
The
lose
milk,
to
the light bulb and the milk's the best part in that movie.
I think she lost to Ginger Rogers and Kitty Foyle.
Yes, she did. And Ginger Rogers wasn't that good at Kitty Foyle.
She's a good actress. It's a lot of people voted for her because they liked her more than all the other actresses personally. And that was the thing.
Yeah, Joan Fontaine was notoriously not a very nice person.
Yeah.
Todd,
Or Katharine Hepburn had stuff as well.
Yeah.
Todd, number 2.
Betty Davis. Anyway.
Number 2. Well, it's impossible to talk about 1940s films without talking about noir. And my number 2 is one of, if honestly not the quintessential film noir. This is the film that if someone's like, what the hell is film noir? I'm like, just watch this movie. And that's Double Indemnity. Double Indemnity with Fred MacMurray, Barbara Stanwyck, Edward G. Robinson. Dennis, you brought up Robinson.
Yeah.
Directed by Billy Wilder, who later went on to direct one of my favorite 1950s films, but that'll be not next time, but the time after, with Sunset Boulevard.
He directed my favorite film of all time.
It's based off of a novel by James M. Cain, Raymond Chandler, and it was a screenplay by the book was James M. Cain, and Raymond Chandler adapted it along with Billy Wilder. That's right. I always get those two mixed up. But this movie is just, the first time I saw this, I just rolled with it. I love. It's got all of the quintessential film noir tropes, all of them. You've got the schlub who is just, desperate and horny and comes across the femme fatale who just plays him like a fiddle. Barbara Stanwyck, I love that whole descent down the stairs with the anklet. And he's like there with the insurance, and he works for the insurance company, and he's waiting to talk to her husband, and it's the extremely hot summer. And a little bit of trivia: anklets apparently in the 40s, it was an urban legend that married women would wear an anklet to say that they were married, but that they were available. So that's why it focuses so much on that in the movie. And you have Fred MacMurray, who's a real normally play just really nice guys. And he's still kind of playing a nice guy, but it's kind of like a nice guy who's at the end of his rope. At nighttime, he goes off, and when he's not, going down insurance, trying to break insurance issues, he's, playing bowling, by himself. And his boss, played by Edward G. Robinson. I loved how their relationship was as strong. Edward G. Robinson is basically the two of them have a very healthy male friend relationship. And there's this part near the end of the film, spoiler alert, shut off if you haven't seen it, where Walter Neff has been recording his entire experiences as a admission of guilt. Well, Robinson finds him and lights a cigarette for him while the police are on their way. And I forget what the line is, but it's something along the lines of Walter Neff says, well, you're, one of the best partners a guy could ask for. And Robinson says, more than that, because they were just such close friends. And then Walter Neff responds back to him, I love you too. And it's almost jarring now to see Fred MacMurray say that to Edward G. Robinson with such showing such male friendship in the midst of this tragic situation. You don't see that anymore. You haven't seen that in a long time. So you have these wonderful parallel between the relationship, Walter Neff has, Keyes, Barton Keyes, that's who Edward G. Robinson is playing, between Walter Neff and Keyes, and then Walter Neff and Phyllis, the femme fatale. And, it just, the cinematography by John F. Seitz, who shot most of Billy Wilder's films, if not all of his greatest ones. It's tight, it's humorous, it's hot. I mean, the sexual tension between Barbara Stanwyck and Fred MacMurray, I never thought I'd say something with Fred MacMurray would be hot. It is. I mean, you can sense the palpable desperation on behalf of Neff, and just how Stanwyck just manipulates the hell out of him. She's fantastic. So, I had to put that at number 2. Noir is one of my favorite genres. It's what I focused on when I studied film. I wrote a 25-page, basically seminar about it for my final thesis. And I don't really think, I think I'd be more likely to cut off Citizen Kane from my top 3 than I could a quintessential noir from the 40s, because Kane does pull a lot of noir elements into the film, even though it's not a noir. But I think if you want to represent 1940s and noir, Double Indemnity is an absolutely perfect film to just recommend to anybody. But not only for the filmmaking, but also for just the social mores at the time, the style, the sexual tension at the time, what was going on behind closed doors in suburbia while everybody, everyone had the perfect nuclear family, basically, It's a hell of a movie that I still think just has an amazing impact even today.
Yes, it does.
And it has one of the great noir soundtracks, one of the great opening themes.
Yeah, who did that? That was, I'm looking it up right now. Who did the music? It was cast and crew. Sorry, I was looking at trivia. Miklos Rosa. Not familiar.
Okay, Brigid.
He did at least one great score.
Okay, Brigid, is number 2 for you.
My number 2 is It's a Wonderful Life. I feel like that's one of those movies that probably you could leave off your list, because it's like, but people, I think, genuinely don't know that it's kind of from that era. They're kind of like, oh, is that from the 40s? And it's just it's been so timeless, and it sticks around for a reason. And the reason why I don't have Citizen Kane and Casablanca on my lists are because I genuinely don't like them. They don't resonate for me, neither of them. And It's a Wonderful Life is it's about love, and it's about community, and it's about how your life adds up to more and it means something. And I just think it's a beautiful, beautiful film. It's the first film that Frank Capra did when he got back from the war. Because I think he enlisted in like 41 or something, 42 maybe, or something. He finished up his last film and then left, and then came back and did It's a Wonderful Life. And it's genuinely so life affirming and so beautiful, and the performances in it really resonate still today. There's just this big heart of that film.
That makes me cry more every time I watch it.
Absolutely. And I watched it as a kid, and I think as a kid I only really liked the parts where like he was falling in love with Mary. That as a kid, that was like, I thought that was
the fun stuff.
Yeah, and also like one of the hottest things is like her losing her bathrobe, and he's just like, oh, Mary, I have your, and she's like, oh, you give me back my robe, George Bailey. It's like,
this is an opportunity that doesn't come across every day.
Yeah, maybe I should sell tickets. Yeah.
Talk about hot, that whole part where he's on the phone with her boyfriend, and she's like right next to him. Holy
Yeah.
shit!
I know.
That's got sparks you can't find in movies at all nowadays. And how he
Exactly.
grabs her, and they both like just fall in passion.
Yeah,
Holy
and the
shit.
moon, and them singing about the light of the moon together.
Yeah.
It's like that's a part of the movie I don't think people talk about a lot, but it's one of the best love stories, I think. And just the fact that like she rallies the town for him, and that people show up. And I think that there's a lot, I mean, even more today maybe, about banks and community and not lining up. And that film is so, there's just like a really healing aspect to it, I think. And it's very much about how we can, hopefully see the best in others and in ourselves, and to look at our lives as something that, I mean, it's all the things. It's all the things. It's gonna make me gooey and cry.
I just wish they would have used a different last name. George Bailey is my brother.
Oh, Chase.
Yeah, there's a million great scenes in that film. A million.
Yeah, the pool opens up, right? Like, it feels like a romantic comedy, and then you're like, oh, this is about so much more. And one of the things that I love too about it is that, in a lot of these like magical realism things where like there's some lesson to be learned from like some element of, something like Clarence coming in and changing everything and being the element of change. George doesn't have to do anything except ask for his life back. It's not like he doesn't like click his heels 3 times or anything. It's there's no like, it's just, he just has to recognize that Clarence is like his angel and that his life was worth something, and he just has to ask for it back.
Yeah.
And it's
Susan's
that beautiful
petals.
message. It's just that beautiful message of like, especially, I think it's such a beautiful holiday film because so many people get depressed and blue around the holidays, and to see this film about someone like thinking about ending their lives and just realizing like, oh, I just have to ask for it back in a moment. I just have to see that I'm worth something to the people around me and to my community, even if I don't think so in this moment. And
how he impacted so many lives.
yes.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
Like he didn't think he did anything.
Clarence.
He thought he was actually told you're worth more dead than alive.
That's right. Yeah.
And then to find out how much, like Clarence says to him, you really did have a wonderful life. Look at everything, like the whole thing about the brother.
Yes.
He wasn't there to save Harry, so they weren't there. He wasn't there to save everyone on that boat.
Yeah.
So all those soldiers died.
Yeah.
It's such a powerful moment. Like people give It's a Wonderful Life a lot of shit. Like whenever I bring it up to anybody, they're like, "Oh yeah, that was played a million times." I'm like, "Have you ever watched it? This is like some dark, soul introspective shit." Yeah. I'm like, Jimmy Stewart is genuinely having a breakdown on screen, pulling from his experience in the war when he's yelling at the family. That to me, that scene is not of the performances at the time. It's disturbing because you're literally seeing a man, an actor, pull from his own very dark experiences and showing that for the film. And people, that scene where he's breaking down at the family is tough to watch, and especially knowing that he's pulling from his own emotional trauma, which I don't think at the time anybody was really recognizing the trauma men were going through in that war. You came back and you just resumed life like normal, It's a hell of a movie that's filled with a lot of layers.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite films of all time. Because there's so much there. And I like the way that Kafka added in the deep stuff.
Capra.
With Capra,
yeah. Or Capra?
Capricorny. That just.
I thought you said
right?
Kafka.
Capricorny.
I thought you said Kafka too. That's why I was like, wait.
Did I say Capra? Well, give me another bucket of tonic. But anyway, I love the way that Capra really just brought in the lightheartedness of Clarence with the heaviness of what was going on. Okay, Kate, number 2.
Hey guys, so do we have 18 minutes left for the entire podcast?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll go quickly. I guess in a way it's good I did this because I wouldn't rank either of these two. Well, actually, I really like Casablanca, but I wouldn't rank Citizen Kane as like the greatest film of all time. It's one of them, or even my favorite, but it is my number two. I have to say with these, even as much as I love the 40s cinema, Hollywood cinema, I don't know if I've shared this with you guys that know me, but I'm more into like the art house, independent foreign films. So this is kind of like a new avenue for me. Even as much as I love the 40s, they're irreverent and actually have a tie for number one. And I don't even know if it's a film you might not have even heard of. So this was kind of cool for me to explore these. So number two is Citizen Kane. We all know who was in it. I also just want to add, and I don't know how you guys feel, I absolutely adore Joseph Cotton. He was deranged in Shadow of a Doubt, and he's in this. He's also in Gaslight. He was the savior in Gaslight, as you know, but he just, I mean, I can't get enough. He's so yummy, right? For lack of a better term. And I love how, I don't think I could rewatch Shadow of a Doubt. And that actually reminds me a little bit of like early 80s noir, how it's like super creepy and inappropriate, like the boundaries that are kind of crossed there. Because I actually saw that on the big screen. But yeah, anything Joseph Cotton's in, just like he's like for me a Peter Lorre, he ups the value.
Wasn't Joseph Cotton's first film Citizen Kane? I think it was.
I'm not sure. I think he was.
I think he brought. I think in the film Citizen Kane, at the very credits, I think they mentioned all the theatrical people that did their first film on Citizen Kane, and I
don't think it was, but I'll try.
What was the name of the players? Come on, Brigid. What was the name of the players?
Yeah, he was in other films.
Players?
It was his second like film.
Too Much Johnson was before that in the Mercury Theater on the Air.
He was with the Mercury Theater.
Yeah, that was
Too Much Johnson. I've seen that, and that was made in the 70s. It had,
that was 1978.
Well, anyways,
it's probably a remake in the 70s.
Okay, so Citizen Kane. We all know Citizen Kane. Yeah, it's.
And I saw that in a film studies class, and we saw it on the big screen.
And I would love to spend time talking as much as we talked about It's a Wonderful Life, about how I think Casablanca is just as good a movie.
Love it.
Brigid, another time and another date.
Yeah, we'll battle it out on another.
I really want to be there for that. I gotta hear.
Okay, Dennis, number two.
Number two. Well, we talked about Olivier there a while back for Rebecca, and reminded me of Henry V, which I was just looking at again, which is a great film and didn't make my list, but it reminded me of a story a friend of mine told me. He was the fight master for Henry V. Olivier's Henry V. His name was Paddy Crane, and I knew Paddy. He's been long since gone now, but I hired him to come be part of the fight directors for the Mount Hope Estate. And he told me that, and in his book, actually, which he gave me a copy of, that he was making Henry V, and Olivier suggested something to him about the fights, and he was kind of like, oh yeah, okay, and ignored it. Olivier fired him, and he said, yeah, that Paddy Crane, he's a great guy, but he's got to learn to listen. And so it was a great life lesson for Paddy. He's a great choreographer, and you can see him in a couple of other films, and if you knew him, you could recognize him. Anyway, I wanted to throw that out there because Henry V then popped up to me, and I'm going, Henry V is a great film. I mean, if you're going to do Shakespeare, what he did with that, it's incredible. And Olivier being an actor primarily, although obviously a great director too, but I always think of him as a great actor. Well, he kicked butt with Henry V, but that's not my choice. Anyway, I got sidetracked by Olivier. So my second one is Grapes of Wrath, and a lot of that's influenced by the book, because I read the book a number of times. I love the social commentary, really heavy social commentary, and personal commentary that the book made, and the movie was able to capture a lot of that, considering you can't read the book in 2 hours, but you can see the movie in 2 hours. That's usually the problem of taking a book down to a movie. But like in Key Largo, the supporting actress won the Academy Award. In this case, it was Jane Darwell. In Key Largo, it was Claire Trevor. I just want to bring that up, little coinky dink there. But Henry Fonda is great. The whole message is just so heavy, and you see one thing I liked about the book. You see the truth about America, in the 30s and coming right up to now. The same kind of consciousness existed. The fact that they would burn the piles of oranges rather than give them to the poor Okies, who they hated and tried to keep out of California, and tried to put them in basic prisons, camps when they got there. And the movie was cinematographer was Greg Toland, who was also a cinematographer on Citizen Kane and a number of other great films. He was a superior guy, and it really shows. I mean, black and white, when it's done right, really, you don't miss the color, because the shades of gray and blacks are just as exquisite as the color. Supposedly, we humans only got color vision for greater self-defense, because that way we could see the predators coming after us easier. Wherever that's true or not, I don't know, but you certainly don't need it. So my first few films were black and whites. I realized, didn't do that on purpose. Probably the third one too, because what I'm doing here, folks, I got my list of 6, and I just said, okay, well, I know I'm not getting rid of Key Largo. I know I'm not getting rid of Grapes of Wrath. Now I got a problem with number 1, because I got to choose between 4 films, of which Casablanca and Citizen Kane were there, but I'm probably not going to choose those, even though I love them desperately, honest.
Well, Grapes of Wrath was a phenomenal film, just a phenomenal film. Number 1 picks, starting with Mr. Fletcher.
Oh no!
So
You got time, Dennis.
I got to choose.
my number 1, as I said, it's another Powell and Pressburger, who made a lot of movies in the 40s, and at least 4 of them are masterpieces, which are The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp and Black Narcissus are the other 2 that they made. But my number 1, it's one of my favorite movies of all time, Matter of Life and Death from 1946. It was made right after World War II as sort of like a kind of effort from the British to make a movie to keep the bridges strong between the Allied forces. And it's about a British soldier that falls in love, or a British pilot that falls in love with an American radio operator played by, it stars, I love this movie so much, I completely lost track of. It stars David Niven, Kim Hunter, and Roger Livesey. And it's a British soldier falls in love with an American assistant. I don't know the exact term for what she does, but right before he is supposed to die, but as he's jumping out of his airplane, the angel that's sent to take him off to heaven misses him in the fog. And so it's this big kind of sweeping, defending your life, like pseudo comedy, pseudo drama, with a lot of psychological ramifications to it. It's beautifully shot in Technicolor, once again by Jack Cardiff, Technicolor, and black and white for the heaven scenes. And it's a beautiful movie to look at. It's really wonderful. It makes me cry at the end every time. A very just beautiful film.
I've been introduced now to the Red Shoes and A Matter of Life and Death. I have no clue. I've never heard of them.
Matter of Life and Death was released initially in the States as Stairway to Heaven. If that helps.
Chase, I'm actually shocked because I know you like Martin Scorsese. The Red Shoes is like a pinnacle movie. I'm shocked you've never heard of it.
I literally haven't. I mean, I have learned a lot tonight, and I can't wait to see these films. I cannot wait to see these films, especially with David Niven, who I love as an actor.
This is young prime Niven.
Yeah. So I'm looking forward to seeing those, and I wish I could comment on them. I have no clue. This is another reason I like the podcast, because you learn a lot of shit that you don't know. Okay, so my number 1, and you guys are going to hate me for this.
What?
Number 1 is because in the 60s and 70s, I acted a lot on stage. Even though I was in the Marine Corps for 4 years, even while I was in the Marine Corps, I acted locally in the local theaters.
Cool.
So I played Hamlet and I played Sir Thomas More. So A Man for All Seasons is one of my favorite films of all time. And of course, my number one film that I'm going to pick tonight is Hamlet with Olivier.
Nice.
Even though it doesn't follow the script,
So what?
cut out a lot.
Who does?
That's true. But Olivier, you would expect him to follow the script. But I loved Olivier. I just love him as an actor. And the set was minimal. It was shot well. I just loved it. I watch films like that and I just sit there and I'm mesmerized, to be or not to be, just doing that. I just sat there and I meld into that character because it just feels comfortable. That's it. It feels comfortable.
Chase, can you do yourself a favor and watch David Tennant starring in Hamlet?
No, I've seen David Tennant do it.
My Shakespeare teacher actually was like, I like his version better. And that's controversial. She's like, I like his version better. But it's interesting for the times because when you think about it, he was basically an adolescent, but back then Hamlet would have been middle age at 20. So it was interesting how Tennant brought that to the piece, just as a side note.
As an aside on Hamlet, one of my favorite renditions of Hamlet was Richard Burton.
He's fantastic. Isn't Burton fantastic?
I love the way. I
haven't seen it.
Just his nuance with the character. He was so much more buoyant than Olivier was.
Yeah.
But still.
I've seen pieces. He did it in the bits and pieces I've seen. He did it in the 60s, right, Chase?
I don't know the year he did it.
Yeah.
I don't mean to make this the Hamlet podcast, but Kenneth Branagh is my Hamlet. And
he was interesting. He was in the 80s.
Yes.
And he also did what Laurence Olivier did and directed it as well, which is so hard to do when you're like the most talkative lead character ever.
This
was the only Ophelia that made me like emotional.
Yes.
Who was Todd?
Kate Winslet.
One of the things I may do as an aside is, I don't know if you're into this, Mr. Fletcher, but I know the other 5 of us are. I don't know you that well yet, but
I've got a shocking bomb to drop after this. But continue, please.
But we might do, because I'm thinking when Dennis was talking about Henry the what was it, Henry the Fifth, one of those Henrys, but one. I'm thinking of, yeah, I see your hands. One of the things we might do is Shakespeare on films with Kenneth Branagh. There's so many great ones out there.
Sir Patrick Stewart is phenomenal.
Oh, I'm 100% on board, but I have never seen or read any version of Hamlet.
That's okay.
Hamlet might be the biggest blind spot in my life.
That's really fun because then you get to,
I'll be I know I'm a fan of some Shakespeare, but yeah, when we get to the 90s, Shakespeare and Love will definitely be in my top 3.
You could come out of it going, who wrote this shit? But
no shit. Yeah, Shakespeare was, he wasn't prolific at all. I mean, he just one or 2 plays that got
writing with a pen. You think it would have gotten more done,
The Globe
and actually,
okay. So my number one. I'm sorry.
Oh no, continue.
Okay, so my number one was Hamlet, and you guys all understand why. It's just I'm being silly, but I just loved that film. I watched it again last week, and I just went, "Oh, I love this shit." So anyway, number one for you, Mr. Todd.
Well, this was interesting. My number one changed actually earlier in this recording. I had to go down between 2 movies, and they ended up being 2 films that I've I've portrayed somewhat on stage. I've played Orson Welles and Austin Pendleton's Orson Shadow on stage. So this is like you, Chase. And then I was also Clarence in It's a Wonderful Life radio show for 2 Christmases in a row, along with supporting characters like Uncle Billy and that sort of thing. And I'm tired of Citizen Kane being number 1. I can rattle off a whole bunch of reasons, and I'm kind of a cross between Orson Welles and George Bailey anyway. But I had to go. I had to go with It's a Wonderful Life as my number 1 for a number of reasons. And Brigid has already covered beautifully many of them, and we already had that conversation. But I'm going to throw in a personal anecdote about it, and then we can just move on. And this is the biggest reason why I went with It's a Wonderful Life is a number of years ago, I came out of the theater scene around here, and it was very toxic for me. I had been doing it for 20 years, and I had ended up in a very kind of just depressive place. I had been volunteering my time for 20 years, helped run a theater for 20 years, was artistic director for 10 years. And, without getting into the weeds of it and changing the names, for the innocent, I came out of it very, very despondent, feeling like I had wasted a lot of my time. Chase knows about this, and Freeman knows a little bit about this. But so basically, I came out of it just being like, I've wasted my time for 20 years. So, and New Hampshire Theater Project, which is a local theater, they actually took me in because I had been doing shows with them before, and I knew them quite well. And I think they had caught wind locally that some shit had gone down. And they were putting together It's a Wonderful Life, and they offered a few of the roles to me because it's a radio show, and we were able to do just the voices on stage. It was like a live radio show. So it's very old timey, but at the same time, very forward thinking in terms of how it was presented. And being able to do It's a Wonderful Life on stage, I bonded with the cast of five or six so closely. And I was playing Clarence to, his name is Peter Josephson, a very dear friend and a great performer who was playing George Bailey. So we had these scenes every single night on stage together. And he had known a lot of what I had gone through. So there were multiple levels to the emotion where he was feeling, as George Bailey, he was feeling very much the way I was feeling in my life at the time. And I, as Clarence, was able to say things to him that I needed to hear. And every night at the end of the performance, we would look in each other's eyes on stage and have the last few lines of no man is, any man who has friends has success. I forget the exact term, the quote right now, but any man who has friends has success. And we would look in each other's eyes every night with that. And it was very, very healing, you know? So that to me, and I agree with everything else you had said before, that it's very relevant right now with banks and foreclosures and the community, you know, breaking apart, and, you know, the haves and have-nots and all that. So it's very relevant story. But personally, it was so relevant that to me is the power of film, that a film from 1946 has so many elements that I could gravitate to, that even performing it on stage, I was having, like, you know, actors have moments where they feel very much within the realm of what they're performing, and they're not thinking about other things, you know. And that show, I did it 2 years in a row, brought it back a lot for me. And I'm not sure if I'll ever act again, but if that was
what you're going to act again?
Well, we'll see. But that project, that's a good one for me to go out on. And that, again, that to me is like the reason why I picked number one for the 1940s, because if a movie from the 1940s can have that impact on me in 2021, at 40, I'm 46, you know, that's a timeless film. I don't care what anyone says. That's a timeless film. So that was why I chose number one.
I'm applauding. People listening, I am applauding. Okay.
Of course you are. Okay, so I think we've spent a lot of time on Capra, but or Kafka.
Yeah. What a blend, huh?
Is that Grace?
That's my mom.
Is that Grace? Hi, Grace.
My mom. Holding up a finger gun to Dennis's head
Crashing
like we're in a
the
film
podcast.
noir, and she's
Shoot him.
Dinner time.
Oh.
Okay, Brigid, it's your turn. Number one.
yeah. So my number one.
Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to thank Todd for sharing that with us.
Yeah, that was beautiful.
It's a tough. Yeah, I get that. So I'm glad that it was a good and that art healed you, it destroyed you, and then healed you. So it like breaks you down, builds you up, right? Thanks for sharing.
Art does that. Art does that. Sorry, Brigid.
No worries. Thank you so much for that. I'm +1 to everything you said. It's just so good. Yes, my number one is The Gentleman's Agreement with Gregory Peck. It's such a dark horse for number one for me. I remember watching it as a teenager and feeling like this is I felt like it was the most amazing thing I'd ever seen. And I rewatched it for the second time because I was thinking about my top 3 and I was like, well, I should rewatch that. I really liked it. And I feel it's this perfect intersection of like, this film needed to be made in the 40s and it reaches across time, and it's important for people to watch now because it's got a really nuanced conversation about prejudice and about not just. So for those that don't know, it's about this writer who is not Jewish. He's asked to do a piece on anti-Semitism, and he goes undercover as a Jew and lives the prejudice. And, his kid is like bullied at school, and like he's, refused certain things, like, as he's getting like engaged and stuff. And it's really about that nuanced space that lives between extremism and like everyday microaggressions, and it's like how those things build up. And it's like this conversation that we're having now nationally still, of course, not as much about anti-Semitism as it is about like Black Lives Matter being more in the mainstream and stuff like that now. But really, it's an incredible film. I was like, this is from the 40s, and like, of course it isn't. It has to be, because it's really so resonant for. They're not talking about Nazis, and they don't call them the Karens. They call them the Cathys. These like these rich white women that are just like, oh well, I'll never go to an anti-Semitic march, but like I will laugh at a Jew joke, like these little things that like make it possible to hold people down in society. And it's just beautiful. It's beautiful. It's about like Americans, it's really about like we're not going to villainize anyone. And she grows by the end of it, like this character who she knows he's not Jewish, and she's going to be engaged to him, and she can't stand that he's pretending to be Jewish because she has to like socially be engaged with him. And she's just like, oh no, we can't have my friends come to this thing, or like, please don't say it. We can let them know you're not really Jewish, right? Like it's mind-blowing and so nuanced for a film from the 40s, which I feel often can hit things over the head, sometimes. This theme is so well done, and more people need to know about it and watch it.
I loved the way that Gregory Peck learned through this whole cycle how anti-Semitism worked in America. He actually learned a lot by doing that.
Yeah, and internalized racism as well.
Go ahead.
Yeah, because there's this scene with his secretary where when she finds out he's Jewish, she's like, I changed my name too. And she kind of like lets him in on that. But then she's like, oh, we don't want, and then she uses a derogatory term for essentially Black people. She's like, we don't want those ones coming into the office though. And he's like, seriously? Like, you had to change your name to get this job. Like, what it's like. And it's amazing, all these levels that I'm like, wow, this was being shown in the 40s. I want people to see it. I haven't seen a modern film as good as this about this.
Well, it won the Academy Award.
It did. Yes.
Kate, number one.
Guys, yeah, so my number one is Casablanca. And I have to be honest, I think this is the first time possibly that I saw it full way through, believe it or not. I mean, I'd seen bits and pieces before, which is kind of crazy, right? But like I had prefaced earlier, this isn't really my genre, although I love Bogey. And I mean, I was thinking because I took notes on all the films, I was thinking with this film, I just want to like for a day, whether I'm talking or answering questions, I just want to use a quote from Casablanca because it pretty much fills the full spectrum of a conversation. Again, Peter Lorre's in this. He boosts anything that he's in. Ingrid Bergman, who I watched last night in Gaslight. I also think it's interesting the way women were portrayed, because I know in a lot of the noirs, they're portrayed as, you know, you have the brassy, but then there's these damsel in distress. And I actually think she was a bona fide damsel in distress in this, but I also didn't, I don't know, they somehow are, as much as I thought they were omnipotent in some level, they're disempowered in others. Like I'm too, you know, I'm too distraught. You think for both of us. I was just like, oh my God, there were definitely times when my eyes were rolling in the back of my head, like, Kate, just, you know, get through the movie. But no, I actually really enjoyed it. Peter Lorre, amazing. I mean, anything he's in. And in a lot of films, I mean, with the exception of M, most of his films, right, he's a character actor in a small portion of the film. And if you guys haven't seen M, that's from the 1930s.
Oh yeah.
Before the Nazi takeover. I mean, it basically set the stage for all horror films to follow. And I feel like with Casablanca, right, Bogey is kind of like the pinnacle of what, and you guys tell me if I'm wrong on this, but he kind of was the model for what a guy wanted to be on screen. And I look at people like even Jack Nicholson, who's one of my favorite, and Don Johnson in Miami Vice. I mean, the way they speak, their expressions, they all, whether they want to be Bogey or there's reminiscence of Bogey within them. So I think there's a lot to this film in that there's a lot of films to follow that have taken obviously from it, but also him as this larger than life leading male. So many of his, you know, the subsequent male leads.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Right. So, but yeah, I mean, there was I think my favorite line, I mean, one of my favorite, there were so many. If it's December 1941 in Casablanca, what time is it in New York? I don't know. I don't know. I guess I'm an easy target, but there were just a lot of really good one-liners, I thought, in this. It had a really good message, you know, redemption, essentially. And I don't know, I guess maybe in a corny way, like love and forgiveness healed him to be able to become human again. Not so, you know, I guess love in the romantic sense, but when people use the word love, I think it has healing modalities, but there's so much more to it than just romantic love. Love really does heal and it opens people up. So he becomes in a way human again. And he's turned off on so many levels. But I was going to give it an honorable mention, but I think it's pretty much tied with number one, in my opinion, and that's Detour. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the movie Detour. Yeah. So I think with Detour, I'm trying to find the year. I'm trying to find where my notes after this. I actually didn't rewatch it because I've already seen it like 3 times. But like Bogey and how he is for subsequent leading males in Hollywood, I felt this film was kind of a cornerstone for a lot of the noirs, for lack of a better term. And that, I mean, just Blood Simple, you know, right, the Coen brothers' first film, and then even like David Lynch's, I think a lot of his aspects of his films, but especially Lost Highway, right, that highway scene when they're going down.
Yeah.
So I think with Detour, also the way it kind of starts in the middle of the movie. So yeah, those are I mean, we're way over time, but I think if you haven't seen E4, it looks like a lot of people have seen it. That definitely is up there.
Yeah, Brigid
Sure.
and I are going to yell at each other about Casablanca for a long time. But
I will speak firmly but calmly. I don't know about you.
I thought it held though. Like I mean, I was like bursting out laughing in certain parts.
Oh yeah, it's got everything. I just think Casablanca's got everything. In an hour
That's
and a
how I
half,
felt
it
about
does
it.
everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, Dennis, number one.
Okay, I'll be brief. I want to know, my number one was between Treasure of Sierra Madre and How Green Was My Valley. So I went with How Green was My Valley because it's more positive, I think, than a treatise on greed, as is Treasure of Sierra Madre. But how many people have seen How Green Was My Valley?
You
have
showed it
not.
to me.
I
watched
started but
it.
haven't finished it, and I
Maureen
saw
O'Hara. Yes.
I was really excited when you said Treasure of the Sierra Madre, but
What's that? I'm sorry, Freeman.
I was really excited with the first one because I was like, I've seen that. I love that movie, but I haven't seen How Green Was My
It's a
Valley
tough choice. That's a great film and great performance by Bogart again. But How Green Was My Valley makes some social and some personal and some familial statements that are just heartrending, and it's a great example of the working man being at the mercy of management and how they can be just totally destroyed by it. But it's beautifully done. John Ford director. Yeah, and Roddy McDowall, who I never
Roddy
thought
McDowall, yes. The
not much of
kid.
as an actor, but he has a great part in this as a kid and does really well. So I'm picking that as number one. I haven't seen it in a long time, but I just know I was really, really moved the first time I saw it.
How did you feel about the voiceover, Dennis? How did you feel about the narration of it?
Well, a lot of times that really helps fill in some of the gaps. You don't have to have the scenes necessarily connect as much as you do without that. So narration didn't bother me in this. In some cases it does. In some cases it's too much. But no, it's fine here. And I think again what it says, what the movie says, and so I've got John Huston and John Ford, my top four movies as the directors. Kind of crowding it in, but really in thinking about it, for me, that was the movie that moved me the most from the '40s, and by God, there are a bunch of them. It's really hard to choose. You could go down, as we all know, a list of dozens and say, well, yeah, that could be, yep, that one's pretty good too. So anyway, that's it. If you haven't seen it, see it because it's very moving. And gosh, there were a whole bunch. But anyway,
it's such a bleak film. It's such a dark film. About the travails that these families go through.
Welsh miners.
Yep, Welsh miners. Okay, guys. Okay, we're going to wrap it up, and I just want to briefly just kind of state that we didn't spend a lot of time talking about the Little Foxes, the Lady Eve, the Magnificent Andersons, Yankee Doodle. Well, of course, that'll come up in another story. Double Indemnity. I'm glad we got that.
Chase, are you an Ambersons fan?
What?
Loving Orson Welles. Are you a Magnificent Ambersons fan?
I'm not a big Ambersons fan. No, not at all. But
I'm a big Ambersons fan.
I liked it a lot too.
Yeah, I think it's
Freeman.
great. It definitely suffered from studio meddling, but I think
it did.
Maintains a strong core.
And we didn't talk about anything about The Big Sleep, Notorious.
I saw The Big Sleep 1978.
So there's a lot of films that we didn't talk about today.
No one talked about The Maltese Falcon. I was surprised.
I went to see that, Brigid, and I didn't get a chance to.
The Maltese Falcon.
Yeah, right.
I mean,
Mildred Pierce, Gilda, and Red River.
Yes.
The Westerner, the Bank.
But those, I think My Darling Clementine and Red River will come up in the next.
I think it will. Yeah. Now that I know we're separating, the next list is going to be interesting.
Yeah.
So
the only one that I had on my list that didn't get touched was The Third Man. With yummy Joseph Cotton.
Yeah. Joseph Cotton.
Yeah.
The Third
Catalina
Man. I'm gonna
Valley.
write that down. I have not.
That's on
seen
my
that.
list.
Oh.
I'm glad that Rope didn't come up. The Third Man didn't come up. White Heat didn't come up.
We're just doing dramas right now, right, Chase?
Yeah, but White
Although you
Heat.
said the Lady Eve.
yeah.
Lady Eve's definitely a
Bank dick in there.
Lady
comedy.
Eve.
Gaslight.
That's
I mean, I
Stanley,
mentioned
too.
Gaslight, but
Gaslight.
that was Todd. I was thinking partway through. I'm like, I would love to like call Todd and like, if this was like real life, I'd like hit up Jazz and we'd go over and pay him a visit. Like that's all I could think of. Oh my God, Charles Boyer was like, they should have just called him Beelzebub with it. He was just the devil.
Yeah.
No one mentioned Gilda, which is interesting.
No,
even though it's
Gilda,
not
yeah.
it's not a great film, but it's very notable, I think.
Rita Hayworth.
Gilda's
God.
Yeah, I was saying to
Gilda's
my
one of those
mom-
movies that
Yeah.
there was so much build up to it. When I saw it, I was like, this is just a Casablanca clone. It's a really good Casablanca
You're not
clone.
wrong.
The Third Man's also kind of a Casablanca clone, but it just
But as Todd was saying, Rita Hayworth, it's like Marilyn Monroe has nothing on Rita Hayworth.
Nothing. First time I saw Gilda, when I know it's the famous me, she looks up with the, I swear to God, my heart stopped for 1 second when I saw that. I'm like, this is insane. I cannot stop watching this woman. She is incredible. I understand why Orson went so hard for her and was with her in The Lady from Shanghai. I'm like,
Lady from Shanghai, also a great one.
yeah.
I met her agent years ago, and he had a ton of Rita Hayworth stories, and I was uncomfortable with a lot of them.
Was she wild, Brigid?
I think she was wounded in the same way that a lot of people know that Marilyn Monroe was. It's like that sex icon of like, you can tell that there's something about having to become that charming to survive is like a really deep scar, actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
Also-
guys, we're going to have to wrap it up.
So Chase, we're going to meet for the top 3 comedies of 1940s next time?
Comedy / other.
Comedy / other. Okay, I already did one
It'll be a
other.
mixed bag.
Yeah.
Top 3?
Yeah, top 3. I mean, think about it.
Getting into 15.
Think about it.
Todd, I like a
top
mixed
5
bag.
for us.
I like a good mixed bag.
Okay. Love
Okay,
y'all.
guys.
Hey,
See
this
ya.
is awesome.
Nice
Yeah, this
meeting
is
you
great.
guys.
Fletcher.
Yeah, same.
Ciao,
Same,
guys.
Freeman and Brigid. Take care, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
This is Chase Bailey from Left Bank Films. We really hope you enjoyed our podcast, The Love of Film, at least as much as we did enjoy making it. Tonight's episode 1 dealt with our favorite films from the 1940s. For further information and more podcasts, please visit leftbankfilms.com/The Love of Film. You will also find the results of this podcast posted there. Thank you very much.